Now, one of my biggest concerns going into episode 9 is simply, how will they handle the return of Palpatine? How do you bring him back in a way that doesn't undo both the fact that balance was achieved at the end of Return of the Jedi, and the sacrifice made by Anakin Skywalker to originally stop him, where he gives his life to pick up Palpatine and toss him down a shaft, and in one fell swoop, destroys the Sith, destroys both Darth Vader and Darth Sidious, and saves his son. And that's really what it was all about for Anakin, just saving his son Luke. I don't think the balance of the Force or ending the Sith factored into his decision at all. And yes, the absence of the Sith and the return of the Jedi did mean the Force was in balance. I've got plenty of other videos where I get into the hows and whys of all that, but for now, let me just say that George Lucas himself has said the Force was in balance at the end of Episode 6, so there's that. The problem with all this, though, is that thanks to the sequels, we now know that Snoke, whoever or whatever he really is or was, actually was around during the time period of the original trilogy. Or should I say, the other sources of canon kind of confirm he was around. That he somehow saw or knows about the events that went down during the final confrontation between Palpatine, Vader, and Luke on the second Death Star. Also, again, in the other sources of canon, he's made references to having several apprentices in the past, implying he's probably been around for a while. Anyway, the fact that Snoke is around during and after the events of Return of the Jedi makes no sense in the grand scheme of things. His existence should mean the Force couldn't be in balance since there was a very, very powerful darkseid user out there somewhere. Furthermore, if Palpatine did straight up survive and endured after Return of the Jedi, that should also mean the Force couldn't be in balance. Again, those who use the dark side cause imbalance. The only explanation, and I'm not saying it's a good one, is that maybe both Snoke and Palpatine somehow cut themselves off from the Force for a time in order to hide out for a bit. Not unlike how Luke apparently cut himself off from the Force as seen in The Last Jedi. And honestly, it wouldn't surprise me if we only get some type of generic answer like this in The Rise of Skywalker, that both went dormant after the Empire fell, allowing the Force to come into balance, and from the shadows then they worked together to mentally destroy Luke Skywalker from afar, and they only emerged after he was broken and in exile. Something like this even gets hinted at in a comic book, that before the events of Return of the Jedi, Palpatine reached out through the Force and almost mentally manipulated Luke into just giving up and flying off. So it wouldn't surprise me if it gets revealed that Palpatine was trying to destroy Luke from afar the whole time, and with Snoke's help, eventually they succeeded. And no, I'm not saying that makes Luke giving up any better. I'm only saying they might try to explain it further in the next movie. Also, I get the feeling that it'll be revealed that Snoke was just Palpatine's puppet the whole time, and little more, if even that, will be said about him in Episode 9. Though again, expect further explanations in the other sources of canon down the road. In fact, I expect lots of books and comics in the coming years to try to do some serious surgery on the sequel trilogy, to give it a bit of a facelift, you could say, or to help it make more sense within the larger story, but that's a whole discussion for another time. Anyway, the main reasons to bring Palpatine back are obvious. For one, Kylo Ren was not a credible threat after The Last Jedi, and since Snoke was dead, we needed a new big bad villain or to bring one back to really finish off this story. And Palpatine is the easiest for the general audience to understand and recognize, meaning most people who know a little bit about Star Wars know who the Emperor is. For another, if Ben Solo is going to have some sort of redemption arc, which is likely, he needs a really good reason to come back to the light. Having to stop Palpatine once and for all, which his grandfather did once upon a time or tried to do, will of course be that reason. Hell, there's a good chance that what Kylo Ren was referring to in The Force Awakens when he said to the melted helmet of Darth Vader that, "I will finish what you started," well, that he was referring to stopping Palpatine for good. Or at least, that's how they'll play it now, even if it wasn't originally where they were going with that. However here, that reason for bringing Palpatine back, which is it's easy because most of the audience knows him already, also likely means we're not going to get much of an explanation for that return. And maybe one of the more disappointing aspects of the sequel trilogy has been the lack of lore or expanding on it. That they're not trusting the audience to understand any sort of complex story that digs a bit into it. And as I've said before, if you're going to call this the sequel trilogy, or in this particular case, Episode 9 and the end of the story, the onus is on the audience to know what happened in the previous 8 parts leading up to this one. All that said, what I would have done had, in some alternate reality, I been the one to write Episode 9, And I've even toyed with the idea of making this my next fanfiction series, is to trust the audience and give them a story that truly expanded upon the lore and tried to justify the existence of the sequel trilogy, in a way that doesn't necessarily undo the ending of Return of the Jedi. A near impossible task, perhaps, but that's what would have been my goal. And one of the only ways I could see attempting that was to bring in Darth Plagueis the Wise, to make him behind everything the whole time. That somewhere along the way, during the 1,000 years of the Sith rule of two, Plagueis did discover the secret to immortality, and it was to continually transfer his essence or consciousness to new, younger bodies. And while doing this, he was looking to manipulate the midi-chlorians into one day making him the perfect host, one that maybe he could keep from dying permanently. And of course, Anakin was one such creation of his, maybe the ultimate creation, which is why the Force made him the chosen one. And though some people certainly won't like this idea, what I'm trying to propose here is that for some good length of time, every Sith Master was essentially Darth Plagueis, moving on from one host to the next when his apprentice became strong enough to defeat him. Hell, if you really want to, you can go all the way back to the beginning and say that Plagueis and Bane, who of course started the Rule of Two, are one and the same. That the reason Darth Bane started the Rule of Two in the first place was to continually pass on his essence. And yeah, again, not everyone will like this idea, but at this point with the trilogy, why not get creative with the story and really try to add something to the lore? So basically what I'm saying here is that every time a Master Sith or Plagueis was struck down by an apprentice, Plagueis was then able to transfer his essence into that new host or the apprentice who had struck him down. This worked all the way up until Palpatine, who truly did learn everything from Darth Plagueis, as he told Anakin he did, including his secret about passing on his essence for all those years. And by killing him in his sleep, somehow this, or something else Palpatine did or knew, prevented the essence transfer and Palpatine broke the cycle. But of course it wasn't that simple to stop a Sith who had been amassing knowledge of the Force for hundreds if not 1,000 years. And somehow Plagueis was able to save himself by, let's say, becoming something almost like a Force ghost, that through sheer will and power, he was able to keep his consciousness intact within the cosmic force after death. And he then watched and waited for the right time to return. Though unlike a true Force ghost, he would have eventually faded away and been no more because, well, we don't ever want to imply that the path of the dark side truly could lead to immortality. In other words, he had limited time to act. So after the death of Sidious and Vader at the end of Return of the Jedi, when the living Force was brought into balance and the prophecy fulfilled by Anakin destroying the Sith, Plagueis saw this to be the right time to act. He was then able to reform within the living Force, but it wasn't a perfect or painless process, and he became the twisted and wretched figure known as Snoke. This return then triggered the Force to create Rey, or we could also say that, much like with Anakin, Plagueis used his knowledge and power to create Rey to eventually be the perfect host for him. There's some flexibility here on how we want to bring Rey into the story and how we want to connect her to Plagueis. Either way, Snoke or Plagueis also eyes Ben Solo as a possible new host. And this is where we could take the story of Episode 9 in many, many different directions. We could have it that, upon killing Snoke in The Last Jedi, the essence of Plagueis entered Kylo Ren and he's been fighting against it ever since, trying to prevent it from taking over. This also explains why the oh-so-powerful Snoke, who could read people's minds, was so easily fooled by Kylo Ren. Or maybe Plagueis is laying dormant within Kylo Ren because it actually wants to possess Rey instead. Or we could even have it where the essence of Plagueis was split and entered both Kylo Ren and Rey, and them coming together will trigger his return in some fashion. Or he'll pick one of them and one will have to try to destroy the other. There's a lot of different ways the story could go and then end, and one important factor is we could even have the Force ghosts, mainly Anakin, play a big part in the ending. That after Rey and or Kylo Ren defeat Plagueis at the end of Episode 9, he again tries to flee or retain his consciousness within the cosmic force so that he can eventually do it all over again, but is stopped and destroyed this time by the Force ghosts, giving them a true purpose in the grand scheme of things. And yeah, perhaps that's a bit cheesy or too much, but again at this point, why not just go all in? As I said before, I really expect this movie not to trust its audience, and to not give us any real sort of answer as to how Palpatine either survived or how he's coming back. Again, they're just using a villain that the audience will recognize, instead of looking for a way to truly expand upon the story and or lore. Anyway, here, I personally think this idea ties a lot of things together and could give us a true end to the Skywalker saga. Not that the first one needed to be redone, mind you, but it gives us more meaning to many things from the previous two trilogies, like the little talk Palpatine gave about Plagueis the Wise in Revenge of the Sith. Well, that's now huge foreshadowing. It also explains why suddenly Force ghosts started to become a thing. They were a counter or reaction to Plagueis managing to maintain his consciousness after death within the cosmic force. It also means with Plagueis destroyed that the movie can make it be known that in the end, the Force ghosts will never again be returning, that their purpose has been fulfilled. Not that they cease to be, mind you, or die off, just that they won't likely have a need to ever come back and interact with the living Force again. It also keeps Anakin as a very central figure in the whole story, and he can have a hand in the final defeat of Plagueis and in bringing a lasting balance to the Force. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you think of my idea or theory, and if you'd like to see me turn it into a full-on fanfiction. Because though I gave you a summary, there are some other ideas or details I left out just in case I do turn this into a full-fledged story. Anyway, whatever you think, leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.